Hi, my name is Mindy Johnson and welcome to the 2021 Spark Animation Festival. We are thrilled that you've joined in and we appreciate your continued support for all the various efforts and vital efforts across the entire Spark platform, featuring a tremendous range of programs and content offered all throughout the year. Within our legacy track, it's my great pleasure to introduce a rare conversation with a couple of very dear friends, two legends of animation, Willie Ito and Floyd Norman, whose collective animation experiences span well over a century, maybe a century and a half worth of work. And at such notable studios as Walt Disney Studios, Pixar, Warner Brothers, Bob Clampett, and many more. And today we're going to be discussing the great animation studio Hanna-Barbera. So let's get underway with these two animation treasures as they reflect on their time at H&B and the work they accomplished at this landmark studio that established Saturday morning cartoons as we knew and loved them. To put this all together and to corral this lively conversation, please help me welcome Spark's own Keith Blackmore. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks very much, Mindy. It's a real pleasure having you. And a real pleasure to have Floyd and Willie with us today. We're talking about Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera, of course, and they were the architects of Saturday morning cartoons. Before the rise of cable, before streaming, before even television was really around, these guys were creating animation at their studio at MGM Studios and that. But then they would go on, leave it. This is another part of the story we're going to talk about today, and create some of the most famous cartoons and a major powerhouse studio that came to be known as Hanna-Barbera. We know them for Flinstones, Jetsons, Johnny Quest, Scooby-Doo, Super Friends, all of those things. And it's our two guests today, Floyd Norman, Willie Ito. They were there to help create, help direct, and help animate some of these greatest shows that we grew up with. So again, welcome Willie and Floyd. Just to kick this off, just each of you, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your animation background. Floyd, how'd you like to tell us first?
My animation background. Okay, well, I've forgotten most of it. I came into the animation business. Well, I started making cartoons when I was still in middle school. So I tell people I go way back. I was actually making cartoons in junior high school in Santa Barbara, with the dream of one day going to Hollywood and working with the big guys like, Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, UPA, so many of the studios and the professionals that I admired. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be one of them. And so that opportunity finally came in 1956 when I was offered a job as an apprentice in-betweener at the Walt Disney Studios. And all I had to do to qualify was to do a halfway decent in-between of Donald Duck. Now, you all know what an in-between is, right? That's a drawing in between two other drawings. I had no idea that that was a real job, that there were people who did in-betweens. Well, what a weird job. You put a drawing in between two other drawings. Well, that's what I had to do. I had honestly never done it before in my life until Johnny Bond gave me two drawings and he said, put a drawing in the middle. That's an in-between. Well, I must have done a halfway decent job because Disney hired me. And that was the start of my career, not only at the Walt Disney Studio, but my first job in the animation business.
And then you went on to do other things. We're going to talk about your days at Hanna-Barbera, but it's a great foundation with what you laid there at Disney. Willie, yeah. Tell us about a little bit about your background in animation.
Well, very much like Floyd, I was always interested in the art of animation. I'm from San Francisco, California, and as I was completing my 2 years at San Francisco City College, my art instructor happened to be a good friend of Don Graham, who was the dean of Chouinard's Art Institute, which today is CalArts, California Institute of the Arts. So I was Well, of course, Don Carl Beats, my instructor, knew my love for animation and suggested that I would go down to Los Angeles, take my portfolio with me, interview with Don Graham, which I did, and I was awarded a scholarship. So I, stayed in Los Angeles and started taking classes at Chenard's. But I thought, as long as I have my student portfolio with me, I'm going to use that as a ticket to see the inside of the Disney studio. I had no intentions of getting hired. I just wanted to see the inside of the studio. So I called and they granted me an appointment. And so I went in. It was one of those June hot Los Angeles smoggy days. And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it must have been 103 in Burbank, I swear. It was just hot. Of course, I was dressed in my San Francisco best, a tweed, slacks, and, all heavy San Francisco clothes. I was perspiring, and I went onto the lot and found the elevator to go up to personnel. So I pressed a button, the elevator door swings open. I step in, and then as the elevator door is closing, it suddenly swings open. And there standing before me is Walt himself. And he's deeply in conversation with an associate. But as he steps in, he acknowledged the fact that I was standing in the corner of the back of the elevator, sort of cowering. And he gave me a polite nod and turned around and continued his conversation. And I'm looking at the back of Walt's head thinking, oh my God, literally, oh my God.
Oh my God.
That was the longest elevator ride for 4 floors,
Yeah.
Then I went over to personnel and got my interview. And after the interview, I was told, well, thank you for coming in. Don't call us. We'll call you. And I figured, well, that's fine. My main objective was to visit the studio. I'm in the studio. And when I left, I took my sweet time just looking at all the exhibits on the walls. And back then, they had the originals on the wall because
That's right.
theft was not one of the
No.
main.
Oh.
So it was the actual cells and the backgrounds and all. And I just took it all in. And I figured, okay, in 4 years, I'll complete my education at Chenard's. And then with a degree and with a professional portfolio, I'll truly make an attempt to get hired. But about 2 weeks later, I get a telegram from the studio inviting me to come in to take some tests. And like Floyd, I went in, sat down, and Johnny Bond gave me a bunch of model sheets of the different characters. Cinderella and Alice, and then of course Donald and Mickey and all that, and told me to spend the morning drawing these characters. Don't trace it just because you're sitting at a light board. Draw it in different poses and angles and this and that. So I did and turned it in and took my lunch break, and upon my return at 1 o'clock, Johnny says, yeah, we liked your test and you're hired. And I thought, what? I can't believe it. I'm hired. And he said, yeah, we're going to start you in the lady unit. And I'm thinking, because I had never heard of a film being made, Lady and the Tramp, because I figured it would be some kind of fairy tale that I'll be working on. And so when I heard lady department, I figured, oh, I guess that's the entry level. You work in ink and paint where all the ladies are. and polish cells or do whatever. And
Yeah.
then eventually work my way into animation. But it was actually working on the Lady in the Tramp. And one of the first scenes that I worked on was the iconic spaghetti kissing scene from Lady in the Tramp. And
Yeah.
so that was my first exposure to the art of animation.
Well, you both have very, very full careers, but we're going to talk about Hanna-Barbera. Your foundation, both of you were at Disney, but you would then migrate over to Hanna-Barbera. But I want to paint a picture for our audience because they weren't around back pre-television, you know. So for our audience today, they're unfamiliar with that world before streaming, as I said, before cable, before television. So when you back in the 40s, 50s, where did audiences get their animation fix before then?
Yeah, movie theaters. You
Exactly.
you saw a cartoon before the main feature.
Mm-hmm. You had a double feature, you had a newsreel,
Newsreel.
had
Yeah.
a short subject, like a comedy thing, and
Yeah.
a cartoon. And I used to go to the theaters twice a week, every Wednesday and every maybe Saturday or Sunday,
Yeah.
looking forward to that cartoon.
Right? And every studio in Hollywood had their cartoon division, right?
They
You
did.
mentioned, for example, Warner Brothers. There
Yeah.
was Termite Terrace. Paramount had theirs.
Yeah.
RKO. And
Columbia.
over, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course at MGM there was
Tom
Oh
and
yeah,
Jerry.
all the
And
Hanna-Barbera
Tom and
cartoons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Hanna and Barbera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera were making theatrical cartoons, over 107 cartoons there.
Yeah.
That's what's
Right.
amazing. But
Yeah.
then they had this transition, and that's what's interesting is that you came in to the animation scene at that transition when the theatrical film was stopping and it was all transitioning to television.
Yeah.
And so Hanna-Barbera, they stopped working with MGM and now they shift to their own studio, the Chaplin Studios. What was your first production that you worked on there, Floyd?
Well, you know, that whole Hanna-Barbera story, I mean, I kind of
Yeah,
watched this thing play out in the 1950s.
right.
I remember when MGM's cartoon unit was shut down, not because I was all that familiar with it, but a lot of the MGM animators came over to Disney looking for employment
Mm,
because Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera's unit at MGM was being shut down. So guys like Carlo Vinci and others came over to Disney seeking employment. Many of them who even because these were darn good animators, but you know what? They just weren't Disney guys. They just weren't part of the Disney culture, and they weren't very happy there. And I know they were delighted when Bill and Joe started up their new production facility, Hanna-Barbera. And I know these old MGM guys were just delighted to return to work for their old bosses. And I remember when that whole thing started, the little studio on Coinga Boulevard, then eventually the larger facility they built. And I remember I was still a Disney employee, and we were all so excited about what was going on over in Hollywood. We would drive over and even sneak inside the Hanna-Barbera building. And here we were already Walt Disney animation artists, but we were really curious about Hanna-Barbera because this was a brand new studio and they were doing new things. I mean, as far as we were concerned, this was like a whole new beginning, a whole
right.
new phase of animation. So for us Disney guys, all of us kids, we were excited to see what was going on over at Hanna-Barbera.
Well, that's the point. I mean, you think because for decades it'd been theatrical,
Yeah,
and now they're transitioning into this new medium, television,
yeah,
and going from a 7-minute short to 24 or 30 minutes basically, and
right.
every week you got to knock it out. So it's not just the MGM crew, but Warner crews and such. Willie, what was your experience then?
Well, I was uh, during that period. I was at Warner Brothers, and I was working. I was in Chuck Jones's unit, and Chuck loaned me out to Chris Freeling to get into layout because Jerry Shinneke, Frizz's layout man, was moving up to become a director. And so Frizz went to Chuck and says, hey, can I borrow Willie to lay out one of my pictures, which I did. So I spent the 6 weeks laying out my very first screen credit Looney Tunes called Prince Violent, later changed to Prince Varmint for television's sake. And it was a Bugs Bunny Yosemite Sam.
Oh.
So now I felt very comfortable doing layouts, although I missed, working with Chuck Jones. So I was ready to start my second picture with Frizz when I got a call from Bob Clampett, who was converting his puppet show, Time for Beanie,
Right.
to the Beanie and Cecil
Cecil
show,
Show.
sponsored by Mattel and will run on ABC. So I got a call and it was an offer I couldn't refuse. So when I went in and told Chuck Jones I was going to be leaving for Bob Clampett's, he kind of shook his head and says, Bob is doing television. It's going to be short-lived. We're doing theatrical. We're going to be around forever. Well, I says, well, Chuck, I have to do this because, the opportunity. So I went over to Clampett's, and a few months later, the buzz was Warner's was closing down their animation unit. And all of a sudden I was getting calls from guys from Warner's, and actually Disney's shorts department also was closing down. So suddenly had an influx of Disney animators. A lot of these guys, that's all they knew was Disney Studio.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and so suddenly, like Floyd was saying, we had the pick of the crop. The
Right.
Hanna-Barbera was hiring guys like Nick Nichols and Dick.
Oh, Michael Maltese, the great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the other thing. While I was at Warner's, Michael Maltese came in one day to Chuck's office. We were all in there, and says, well, Chuck, I'm going to be leaving. And Chuck was really surprised. He said, yeah, I got this offer from Hanna-Barbera, which I can't refuse.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Warren Foster gave notice, and he was leaving.
Yeah.
So two of the key Warner Brother storymen were now defecting. So something deep inside me was saying, well, I shouldn't feel too bad about defecting myself, because two of the most guys are leaving. And so, hey, and so that was sort of the beginning of the exodus.
It's kind of, you look back and you reflectively and you go, boy, what a time that was to be able to go to the theater, watching it at the theater, like you said, twice a week, and so much of theatrical cartoons, and we just don't have that experience anymore. But that being said, it's transitioned into this new medium, television, and now the opportunity. So Hanna-Barbera starts off with, Rough and Ready Show and Yogi Bear, and then the Flintstones, of course.
Yeah.
Now, what were the productions that you both worked on? Maybe Floyd, go ahead.
When I started there, the Jetsons was in early production, but Flintstones, the Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, they were pretty much established by then. And so basically I worked on the Jetsons as a starter, and then segued into all of the other shows, because there were so many shows that we could literally pick and choose whatever we wanted to work on,
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Floyd, what did you start on? What show?
Believe it or not, I started working for Willie. I'll never forget. Yeah, I got booted out of Disney, I think around 1972. I didn't choose to leave. They invited me to leave.
Okay,
But that's
so the
another
next decade, you
that's
came in
another
the
whole
later
story by
decade.
it by itself. But I went over to Hanna-Barbera to work in layout, and I worked in Willie's unit on Josie and the Pussycats.
Oh,
What
classic.
a great way to start my career at Hanna-Barbera.
When,
And
when you, but when you look back, like you started on Sleeping Beauty, you know, you do
yeah,
these classics of the Silver Age of Disney. How
yeah.
did it feel leaving Disney and working on Hanna-Barbera? Did it feel like a setback?
Oh, not at all. You know, it was, I mean, it was totally different when you go
Yeah.
from Disney feature films that, you know, take 3 to 4 years to do. And then you go to Hanna-Barbera where they're knocking out shows practically every week. I mean, it was, to me, it was almost invigorating because guys were just like working like crazy and knocking out footage like, you know, we never did footage like that at Disney. You know, we did like 5 or 6 feet a week at Disney. And
They're doing like 1600.
yeah, yeah, at Hanna-Barbera, they were just grinding through footage like crazy. I
Yeah.
remember when I started animating, they expected me to do like 75 feet a week. And I did it, and it wasn't even difficult to do 75 feet a week at Hanna-Barbera.
That's funny. Well, let's talk about that, the production values, the difference
Yeah,
from theatrical, where you were doing, you know, even when Hanna-Barbera was at MGM, they
yeah,
only were doing 7.5 minutes cartoon and maybe what, 10 of them a year? And now
yeah.
you got to push out, like you said, 30-minute shows, and they were doing so many shows.
Well, Hanna-Barbera proved it could be done. I think a lot of animators thought what H&B was doing was impossible. How in the world could an animator do 100 feet a week
Yeah.
when over at Disney he was doing like 5 or 7 feet a week, and that was considered good back in those days. And now all of a sudden, guys were doing hundreds of feet a week. But Bill and Joe knew it could be done. They also knew it had to be done. This was a new era. This was television, not theatrical. So, you know, different time constraints, budget constraints. So, you know, we had to enter a whole new paradigm in the production of animated films.
And of course, during that period, one of the hottest studio in town was UPA.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And UPA had what they called, well, what we called limited animation at Hanna-Barbera. You know, they use the same technique
Yeah.
that Hanna-Barbera did, but for their reasons, it was stylized animation. For our reason, just to get the shows out, it was limited animation and you know, feet walking with the held body and all that. That became the norm. But
Yeah.
when you look at the early UPA cartoons, you go, wow, how innovative it looks. You know.
Well, to that point, you're right. It was the blessing and a curse. But I mean, the
Yeah.
blessing was that they could reduce the number of drawings.
Yeah.
UPA introduced us, as you said, Willie, to limited animation. They had the more graphic style. So, what were the benefits of using that limited animation at Hanna-Barbera? How did it change, for example, coming from a Disney studio where you paid attention to your timing and poses and even writing? How did limited animation change your writing style or the benefits of it? What were the benefits of it?
Well, I think for Bill Hanna, it was the economy of it,
Yeah.
being able to turn out so many
Mm.
so much footage per week. And Joe himself was such a great salesman that story has it that on a Friday, he would invite some of the story guys for lunch at one of his favorite Italian restaurants in Hollywood. And they'd sit around, have their martinis, and on a cocktail napkin, these guys would make sketches. Well, what if we did this, Joe? And whatever. And he'd take all these cocktail napkins and stuff it in his pocket. And then that night, he'd fly on the red eye to New York. And then next morning, he would have meetings with the sponsors and the networks and all that. And on the basis of these quick sketches on cocktail napkin, he would improvise a story based on these little drawings. And suddenly he had the network people mesmerized. This is sold.
Oh,
We
we'll
were
take
on
it.
that show.
Yeah.
Bill would go to the phone Sunday night and says, "Hey, Bill, you better round up some more animators because I just sold another half-hour show."
Yeah.
And Bill would say, "How the hell am I going to get all this footage out? We have no more animators left in town." So now all these old guys from Terry Toons and Fleischer Studio is being recruited out of retirement to
Yeah.
Wow.
put footage or either come out and start working at the studio.
Did
It's a crazy.
did Grim Natwick ever work there with you?
I won't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised if he
I wouldn't
did.
be surprised either. I mean, that guy's as old as dust.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody worked for Hanna-Barbera because I recall guys from everywhere, from Terry Toons, from Fleischer, from Disney.
And walk down the hall, you see a new guy, and you say hello.
Yeah.
And then
Well, that's the thing. Every studio in Hollywood was shutting down. No more cartoons were being made.
Right.
And so they all shifted to television. Hanna-Barbera created something that was so new.
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And then, of course, one of my cohorts that I worked with at Warner Brothers, we were doing these Bell Telephone Dr. Frank Baxter Science Series.
Oh, yeah.
And every different studio was assigned one of these shows.
Yeah.
So Warner Brothers was assigned one, which Chuck Jones was named the animation director. So Chuck had Bob Singer, a fellow named Lou, Filmation, Lou. Anyway,
I guess they Adler, but
Lou Scheimer.
Lou Scheimer. Okay.
Lou Scheimer and myself. Chuck put us in a separate office away from the main animation unit.
Yeah.
Storyboards and designs and all that on this Dr. Frank Baxter series. And Lou would be sitting in there drawing and say, "Oh, heck with this stuff. Someday I'm going to be a producer and just hand out the work." And sure enough, he ended up with Filmation.
That's exactly what he did.
Like the second largest producing studio in Hollywood next to
Well, I remember reading and talking about that with some of my students. And I think one year Filmation produced, 80 30-minute shows.
Yeah.
And that's the equivalent of 25 features.
Mm-hmm.
They were amazing. Yeah.
They're knocking out. Like, who does 25 features in a year? What name one studio that does that animating by hand? That was in the days of when it was painted as well by hand.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Unbelievable. So that's why limited animation was so valuable. Sorry, Willie, I interrupted.
What was unfortunate for Lou and his crew was the fact that they never actually sold their own show. They serviced other company like the Archies from the Archie comics.
Right. They didn't own the IPs. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, when it came time for like Bill and Joe to get all the royalties and residuals and reruns and all that, Lou did retire very, very handsomely, compensated.
Yeah.
But, they never really owned any of the shows.
Right.
I guess they also did the Bill Cosby show.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
And I doubt if they owned that either.
Was that, what about the Fat Albert? Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Fat Albert.
Fat Albert and the Cosby
Kids. Hey.
Yeah. But I don't think they owned that one either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Bill Cosby, I guess, owned it. But.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like they had to be really creative to do that. I mean, you're cranking it out at such a high rate and so many shows that they had. I mean, the decade of the 1960s going into the 70s, that growth and dominance I mean, this is when we first establish that there's actually programming for children,
Yeah.
Saturday morning
Yeah.
programs. And then we start getting all the toys and the cereals and the vitamins, all that as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and even though we worked very hard, and Willie can attest to this, that we worked really hard, cranked out a lot of footage, but we also had one heck of a lot of fun.
And we did.
I can't think of those decades of Saturday morning at studios like Hanna-Barbera were probably maybe not the most glorious days of animation,
right.
but boy, did we have fun making those shows.
We did.
But they also cranked out prime time because you think like that's what
Yeah.
the Flintstones was, and even the Jetsons. It was a prime time show, the first time we've ever seen that. And the reason why we have Simpsons and Family Guy today.
Yeah, yeah. We
because
had
of-
Johnny Quest,
Yeah, Johnny Quest. That's a good example.
prime
Yeah,
time show. Yeah.
right.
And see, when we launched into shows like Johnny Quest, we suddenly realized we don't have animators that knows real anatomy.
Right.
It was the rubber hose animation is what we would refer to. And so you had live action type characters like Johnny Quest being animated by guys that worked at Max Fleischer, and they remember rotoscoping,
Yeah.
but so far as animating fresh, it was something to be desired. So that's when we found the necessity to go out and hire comic book artists like
Right.
Yeah.
Alex Oath.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that and ask about that. I should say ask about that. But yeah, because there's that transition because you're dealing with a lot of cartoon animals, talking animals, anthropomorph, and then you get into that series. And even when Floyd comes in, they start doing more superhero series too
Yeah.
in the 70s. So that requires a different style.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who are some of those comic book artists that they came in that were working there?
Well, Alex Toth was, let me see, and
Doug
Warren
Wildey?
House and Russ
Heath.
Heath,
Russ Heath.
and
All the guys from DC and Marvel, guys like Mike Sikowski.
Marky Moore from Whitman Comic Books. He used to do a lot of the westerns,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
they help set up like key poses.
Right.
Then the animators would put the in-betweens. So the characters would start with a strong pose,
Yeah.
end with a strong pose, but in between would be what the animators would put in.
Yeah.
Whereas before, the animators just animated the whole thing from a strong pose to a whatever, but it
Yeah.
was so rubbery and it was
Yeah.
just, you know.
Interesting.
Of course,
Yeah.
Joe was rather unhappy with it, and Bill Hanna says, "Well, what are you going to do? We got to meet these air dates." And
Yeah. It still worked, in its own way.
Yeah.
It still managed to work.
Mhm.
So what shows in the 70s, besides apart from Josie and the Pussycats, were you both working on?
Let's see. I did Godzilla. So
Oh.
somebody reminded me of that recently. I worked for Doug Wildey on Godzilla, Jana of the Jungle, which was also very much like a live action show. But I actually preferred the cartoony stuff. I preferred working on shows like the Flintstones because that was more more up my alley.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but at Hanna-Barbera, you sometimes had to make yourself fit into any category that Bill and Joe needed at the time. So you had to be flexible.
So at a given time, at a given moment at the studio, how many productions were going on?
Oh my gosh, it was I couldn't even begin to.
I know they've. Go ahead. Can you guess? I don't know.
A number of them, yeah, a number. Of them.
Because I know they did over 150 altogether. I mean, probably 175 even. But yeah, and so would you move? Actually, they actually move you if they needed to go to another production to help finish that and help do this, or would you just stay on that production for the year?
What they finally had to do is put supervisors on each show, and that's what you concentrated on. That's where you jobbed out the scenes.
Yeah.
Like when Floyd came to work with me, you know, he was one of my layout guys, and I would sort of concentrate on just my unit, totally oblivious to what else was going on around the studio because there's so many things going on. And to this day, if I'm watching like Boomerang or one of the old Hanna-Barbera reruns, and I see a Hanna-Barbera production, I said, well, did we do that show? It's like,
it sounds like it was like almost organized chaos because you have so much, and to try to bring it all together. And then with each week, there's so many, you have to get it done. There's so much to do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Bill Hanna was a master at organizing this chaos, and somehow he kept the ship sailing, and Bill knew how to get the job done. I mean, Joe knew how to sell it. Bill knew how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Bill would always dangle a carrot. When we were doing these shorts, Bill would come and say, hey, you're doing one show on staff. How would you like to pick up a show to do in the evenings? And by that point, many of us were beginning to show our greed. Because you can make all the money you wanted to. So I had a very prolific assistant. He was from Japan, and some of these Japanese artists, they would literally camp under their drawing board for the night and then get up and sit down and start in. You remember Steve Nakagawa?
Oh, yeah.
Well, him and I teamed up.
Yeah.
I would rough.
Right.
And then turn it over to Steve, and Steve would carve out and true up the characters and all that. So the old adage, two heads are better than one, it really worked for us. And
this was Yusaku Nakagawa, who renamed himself Steve.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He would be around the clock.
Yeah.
And
But, you know,
animators like Carlo Vinci and the old, they knocked out footage. I mean, when you think what they used to do at MGM, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And go 200 feet a week.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was just mouth.
Yeah.
And, you know, the body is held.
That's right.
The eyeball blinks and the mouth is going, and you got feet after feet on the exposure sheet, and they're getting paid for foot. You
got paid by the footage. And
but this is why they also call it illustrated radio, because
it was
because when you watch it with the sound off, you cover your ears, you had no idea what was going on, but then you cover your eyes and you hear it's just a radio show.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's still
because of that limited animation, just the mouth or just the hand.
It was still funny because those shows were well written by guys like Tony Benedict and Warren Foster.
Yeah, those guys were. They storyboarded it, and then and then of course that was right after the heyday of radio. So you did have a lot of radio stars doing the voices.
Sure.
And these guys all came out of radio. Like Penny Singleton, who was Blondie, was Jetsons' wife, and so the scripts read like radio scripts. You could close your eyes and literally. But then the network came in and says, "Hey, Joe, we have to have some of the name recognizable writers on the credits." And so, much to Joe's chagrin, he had to relent and bring in regular writers that overwrote things, and And so again, it was up to guys like Tony, or by then we actually had a storyboarding department that would read these scripts and translate it into storyboards so it'll work. And so it created a whole new story editor department, you know. And,
yeah, interesting.
We had to take bad scripts and make them funny.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, like you said, Floyd, too, with the writing had to improve too. You had these strong poses, but you had really good writing, and that's why it was able to go into prime time. Was it different working on the primetime show from, say, the Saturday morning animation show? Did they pay more attention to it or less? Or
you had more time. Usually, you had more time and more money.
Yeah.
But H&B had a production pipeline that was already pretty much set up. So, you know, we knew what the studio could do. If it was a prime time show, you had a little bit more time and a little bit more money. But other than that, the process was pretty much the same, I think.
Yeah. When we look back at those theatrical cartoons, I think of, again, Chuck Jones, Tex Avery,
Chris Freeling.
And exactly, and those theatrical cartoons, they were made for adults. They were made at the theater.
Yeah.
And they try to translate that humor into television. And now in the 70s, of course, they are getting attacked by parents and government agencies like Action for Children's Television.
Oh, yeah.
And there's complaints of violence. How did that affect the studio?
Well, we had this thing at the networks, right? You know, broadcast standards and practices.
That's right.
And they would kind of like monitor everything we would do and tell us how offensive our stuff was, and make us change it, because you couldn't have anything that was violent or sexist, or basically you couldn't have anything funny in the show. Because funny was always offensive.
Because violence is always funny.
Yeah.
Kidding. Well, you know, I mean, I watched Screwball Squirrel the other day, 1942 with Tex Avery, and I mean, the audiences are shocked today. It's like, what? They would let that? But it wasn't made for children.
No, it wasn't. And besides, it was just wacky humor. It wasn't. Exactly. It wasn't meant. It wasn't political. It wasn't serious. It was just crazy, goofy fun.
Yeah,
but a lot of suits don't understand what we do, and they still don't understand this to this day. We have executives in charge of animated shows today who have no idea what cartoons are.
No,
and they're the ones in charge. So there you go.
And I think, sorry, you had something to say, Willie? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, one of the studios I work for, which I won't mention, but then the network would see rough cuts of the show and make a lot of corrections, especially if it was off color or whatever it was, you know.
Yeah.
And so the producer would just sit on those changes and see. Back then, before the so-called electronic boom, you literally had to hand carry your film and take the red eye to New York in time for the network to run it on so there was no time for changes. So a lot of the jokes and visual gags and things that the network wanted cut out was never done.
Yeah,
it was like last minute, and so the producer would say, "Yeah, well, we'll take care of it for the reruns," but it never was, because that was one of his favorite gags.
Yeah,
just resented the networks chiming in and having him change things and all that.
Yeah. Well, I could imagine. I mean, you bring in this cast of animators from the golden age, that had been working on all that great theatrical cartoons, and now they have to yield to these voices of the parents and government, and now I know it did affect it because they did have to kind of they watered it down so the content was more like, what are the lessons for kids?
Yeah.
And now it's like every show is becoming like Sesame Street. What
Yeah.
can we learn
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, right,
In that
right.
regard. So,
Yeah. Well, I worked on Sesame Street, so I was part of
not,
that.
yeah,
I
not
was
to
part of
denigrate
that too.
Sesame Street. That's
Oh, no,
great
no, no.
animation.
Yeah. But we were
Yeah.
still funny.
Yeah, yeah. But everything was, instead of being entertaining, it was always about a lesson. What lesson are we learning today?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because we had so many authority figures watching us and watching our bad behavior, and trying to set us on the straight and narrow. So there you go.
That's it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, you can't underestimate the impact of Hanna-Barbera, that's for sure. What was you were there for 14 years, Willie?
Yeah, I was at Hanna-Barbera 14. Yeah.
And what was the final production that you worked on?
Well, let me see. I can't really remember, but the show that I more or less created and overlooked or oversaw was Hong Kong Fooey.
Oh, yeah.
And, that was a lot of fun because
Yeah.
it was during that period where the networks again insisted that we get voices, none of this Amos and Andy type of thing where white actors,
Right.
if we were going to do the Harlem Globetrotter show, we want all African American actors doing the voices. And then if we're going to do the Amazing Chan Clan, we want all Asian actors come in and audition.
Yeah.
And so that was that period where that sort of movement was kicking in. So when I created Hong Kong Fooey, I went to one of my favorite restaurants in Hollywood called the Imperial Gardens, where a lot of Asian actors would hang out. And I was there one evening, and Pat Morita was sitting at the bar. So I said, "Hey, Pat, come on over." I said, "Hey, did you ever think about doing cartoon voices?" And he says, "Well, no, I never had the occasion to." I said, "Well, listen, why don't you come in Monday morning and set up an audition and give a sample of your thing, and then because I think I have something in mind." And so come Monday morning, no calls. Monday afternoon, no calls, nothing. So Wednesday, I happen to be at the Imperial Gardens again, and I see Pat there, and I said, "Oh, hey, come on over, Pat. We missed you Monday. I wanted you to give some samples." And he says, "Yeah, but my agent called that Sunday night and says I should go for an audition at Sony or Warner Brothers or one of the studio." And I said, "Oh yeah, well, if you didn't get it, come on over to Hanna-Barbera." He said, "Well, I did get it." He got the Karate Kid, the lead in Karate.
Karate Kid. Yeah, he was the master.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm thinking, well, I still got to find good voice for Hong Kong Fooey. So one night, myself and two of my cohorts, we were down at a bar in Hollywood called the Hollywood Bowl. It's not where they do the concerts.
No.
But it was a bowling alley, and in the bowl was a lounge. So we were sitting in there having a few drinks, and the comedian was on stage, and he was funny. So when he finished, I invited him over, have a drink and all that. And I said, would you like to try to do some voices? And he was very happy to. So Monday morning, I went into Joe and told him about the prospect. He said, "Yeah, have him come in." So he came in and he auditioned, and Joe loved it. And he got the part. That was Scatman Crothers.
Really?
did the voice for Hong Kong Fooey.
He went from working with Ralph Bakshi to working on Hong Kong Fooey.
So unlike the network's request to have a Asian to do the voice, you know, we figured it's a dog character. It could be anyone. Scatman fit the bill.
I was gonna say Scatman is not Asian.
Yeah, I know. He was.
You know, there's a lot
You
of
brought up the Harlem Globetrotters. Didn't they actually have Meadowlark Lemon and Curly do the voices?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
They
Sure
had
did.
a lot of the actual guys come in and but you gotta say, you know, it lends to the show, because to have the, you know, proper actors and whatever. But yeah, so that was, you know.
Yeah, you don't want just a guy that's a consultant. You want someone that's authentic. Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we had a fair number of big shot, you know, movie and TV stars come into H&B to do voices. So we had a bunch of them come in.
Oh,
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Josie and the Pussycat was what's her name? One of the angels. Not Diane Lane, but
Not Farrah Fawcett.
that blonde.
The blonde.
It was after Farrah Fawcett left the show.
Oh.
Cheryl Ladd.
Cheryl Ladd. That's
Cheryl
right.
Ladd.
Okay.
So I'm sitting in my cubicle working away. The first time I'm working away, and then suddenly I feel all these eyes in the back of my head. So I turn around, and all these tall black actors peering over the cubicle. What are you working on? And what are you doing? And all that. So, you know, I kind of show them. And then a few weeks later, I see hands with just the tip of the head, kind of looking like this. I look and I see it's a bunch of Asians.
A little bit shorter.
And then again, a few weeks later, I hear, "Oh, that's wonderful. What are you working on?" And I look, and there's Cheryl Ladd.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh, yeah, I'm working on it. Tongue-tied.
It's a different experience creating it for television as well, as opposed to theatrical, because you don't really get the like you can sit in the theater and hear the response of the audience to what you've created.
Oh, that's true.
But how did you get feedback? Did you get it just from your friends and family, or what was the response when you were doing it?
I don't know. I don't remember any response.
No one said, "Hey, great thing you're doing there, Floyd."
Saturday morning, I would watch the Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
Right.
Not Hanna-Barbera. I was always watching what Filmation was doing, or the competing studios, to see what they're up to.
Yeah, you watch the competition.
I'm looking at Hanna-Barbera stuff.
Right. Yeah, you got to watch Spider-Man. Sing along with Spider-Man. How hands-on what were Bill and Joe in the process of the shows?
Bill very much hands-on. I mean, think about it. Here's Bill Hanna, one of the bosses who owns the studio. But Bill was one of these guys who would come down into the trenches, and he would come down and sit there at your desk or at a table with you and go over a storyboard. You know, the kind of guy who would roll up his sleeves and get right down in there and work on a show with you. That's the kind of guy Bill Hanna was.
Yeah.
In fact, when he set up his studio in like Australia, you know, he would make frequent trips.
Yeah.
Check on his people, and most of the people working there weren't actually Australian artists. There were a few, but Bill sent a lot of our in studio people to go over there and supervise and look things over.
Yeah.
Then he also farmed out a lot of things to Cuckoo Nest, which is Chinese studio in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And I had the occasion to visit that studio, and they were doing tons of Hanna-Barbera work.
Yeah.
And that's where these Asian animators would literally sleep under the desk, get up in the morning, sit up, and start working. It was really
Well, what an exciting time when you think about that transition. From in the 50s into the 60s, that transition from theatrical to television, and that closure, what was happening with all those transition, the migration
yeah,
of animators, the tremendous animators that came into television, and
Yeah.
that,
yeah.
and where we are today. Even I look at the theaters today are still having the same challenge.
Yeah.
Because they have to face streaming now and all this.
Oh yeah,
When I can watch it when I want, where I want,
right.
and that. So and there's so much great opportunities in animation today, just there like there was in the 60s and 70s.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the business has never been more robust as it is today.
Yeah.
There's so much work going on. There's so many projects in development and in production. It is an amazing time to be in animation. I kind of regret that, I'm an 86-year-old codger, and it's like, I'm too old now to work. But but to be a young kid starting my career today, it would be really a very exciting time to get into animation, because there's just so much happening.
Exactly right. Willie?
And during that period, of course, Warner's closed shop.
Yeah.
Chuck Jones started his own studio.
Yeah.
Frizz got together with David DePatie and started the DePatie Freeling studio.
Yep.
And now they were pirating from Hanna-Barbera. So we would constantly get calls saying, "Hey, would you like to make a change? You want to come over?"
But I love that about animation, because it's really a small community and everybody knows everybody. Like, these guys wanted to come over and see what they were doing. The Disney guys are going to Hanna-Barbera. But even when UPA was happening, that seemed like, oh, what's those guys at UPA doing down there in Burbank? That it still happens today, that shifting and that. So
there's only so much talent, and then of course it's great for the talented guys, because that means you've got different studios bidding for your services. So it's great for the artists.
And like you were saying, it's a camaraderie. And every Thursday, when the studios of paycheck time, most everyone would leave the studio to go to the bank to cash their check and whatever. Then we would go to our favorite watering hole. And so that's when you get together with guys from the other studios, Smokehouse or the China Trader or
Far East Terrace.
And sure enough, you'll see your comrades there drinking. People from other studios will show up and we'll compare notes and this and that, And then of course, when UPA was in existence, they were right next door to the Smokehouse, which was one of the most traditional hangouts for animation people.
Right.
And so I think a lot of the animators that would take so-called coffee breaks, would just walk over to Smokehouse and have a martini or two. So it was not unusual to have the rest of the day with drunken animators working.
It hasn't changed too much.
It was right next door, so you could stagger back to work.
Oh, perfect.
How convenient.
So apart from the Smokehouse memories, what are your favorite memories of working at Hanna-Barbera? Floyd?
Oh, just the pure fun. Because, here again, the guys who own the studio, the guys who run the studio, they have to know what business they're in. Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera knew they were in the cartoon business. That meant that their employees were going to be a bunch of madcap, wacky, crazy cartoonists. And Bill and Joe allowed that because that was the business they were in. They expected us to be a bunch of goofy, crazy guys and gals having a good time because by being who we were, we did our best work. And we turned out tons and tons of work, and we made a lot of people rich, I think, by doing so. But, you know, having said that, we all had a great time making some of the greatest cartoons, working with some of the greatest people. And I can't think of better bosses than Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera. Yeah, we joked about them and complained about them, but they were really two great guys.
And they were both night and day.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Night and day. Yeah.
they didn't really mix socially together. Joe lived in Beverly Hills, big mansion, and dressed Natalie and
Yeah.
a black Cadillac.
Yeah.
Bill lived in the valley. He was a Boy Scout grandfather, drove a brown colored Lincoln. Their office were furnished exactly the same, but in different colors.
Yeah.
It was gray and black, and Bill's was beige and brown. You know, that's
What's your fondest memory there, Willie?
well, like Floyd was saying, you know, the camaraderie. You know, I met a lot of fun people there that is still close to me today.
Yeah.
And then of course we suffered the same trials and tribulations of our workplace, and we would bitch, and complain about situation. But then in retrospect, we look back and says, God, I just love that period. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
so much fun. So, you know,
Yeah.
it was great times.
Yeah. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to talk about any bad memories because so many of the memories were good. I mean, we work with so many great artists, men and women who were so talented, men and women who were so much fun to work with. I mean, it was just a glorious time. And I tell the kids, if you didn't work at Hanna-Barbera in the 70s, boy, you really missed a golden part of animation because those were some very choice years. And the best in my career, you know, in some ways even better than Disney.
Yeah.
You know, in 3 weeks, there's going to be another Hanna-Barbera reunion.
Yeah.
And we haven't had a reunion since, what was the last one at the Sportsman's Lodge? That was
Whoa.
25 years ago, 30 years
How
ago.
long ago?
So this is
25?
just like a private dinner for all the guys.
For the Hanna-Barbera people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Joanna Ramersa, one of the gals that actually were part of our group,
Yeah.
she has organized it. She suddenly had the realization because we just lost one of our close cohorts.
Mm.
Yeah.
And at his passing, Joanna felt, my gosh, time's getting away. We're losing a lot of our good friends. So let's have another reunion. And right now with the COVID scare, yet a lot of people has sort of declined. But I just spoke to her just before the Zoomcast, and she says she expects about 100 people. About 50 has already signed up and sent in their check. So that would be, it'll be a good reunion for those that will show up and be there. And I won't be able to recognize anyone because we'll all be wearing masks.
That's it. Well, that's
because we were all so old.
Well, this has been a real pleasure spending time with both you, Floyd and Willie. When we look back at Hanna-Barbera and their impact, I mean, they changed the course of television, and they invented a system where they really introduced a whole new way of producing animation for television as well. And we still feel their impact down to this day. It was a real pleasure talking with you both. We look forward to seeing you and having you join us again at another time. And thank you for all those ones in the Spark audience that have enjoyed this session. We look forward to seeing you in person again at another time as well. Thank you.
Bye all. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Take care, Keith.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Spark Animation Festival and this afternoon's special session on Hanna-Barbera. You know, we're talking about the architects of Saturday morning cartoons, and before the rise of cable and streaming, Saturday mornings for children in North America was spent watching cartoons. And these two gentlemen, Floyd Norman and Willie Ido, they were there helping create, helping direct, helping animate these great shows that we grew up with. Welcome, Floyd. Welcome, Willie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Now, I understand just recently you had a big reunion on Hanna-Barbera, the team, the crew. Tell us about that.
Well, the last reunion was whatever date that's up there in 2009. And then recently we lost one of our very dear cohorts that also went back. And so Joanna Romersa, who is one of the veterans in animation and also worked at Hanna-Barbera, she thought, you know, maybe it's time to have a reunion. And of course, everyone had second thoughts because of the pandemic. However, she got a feeler out there and about 100 people responded and says, hey, this is really our last chance. So it was held and it was well attended. Two of the oldest attendees were Bob Singer. I don't know if you know the name. Mm-hmm. Bob Singer was one of our veterans, and a fellow named Art Leonardi.
Wow.
Who later went on with the Patty Freeling and worked on the Pink Panther show.
Yeah.
So they're both in their 90s and they showed up. And that's then the rest of us were pretty much in our 80s and 70s. So it was pretty much an old codgers get together. But we had fun as if we were still in the heyday of Hanna-Barbera.
That's awesome. I just want to remind the participants, those ones that are attending here, that they can write their questions into the Q&A, and Floyd and Willie would love to take your questions from the audience. In the meantime, I'm going to continue asking my own questions. Mm-hmm. Both of you started at Disney, working on feature films, and you worked there in the late 50s, and then you transitioned from theatrical to television. What was that transition like? For example, maybe Floyd, you want to kick it off?
Well, it was what you might call a culture shock.
Yeah. Yes, it was. Yeah, the transition from theatrical to television. But basically, television is what really saved animation during that critical time because, you know, short cartoons were not profitable. Short cartoons were being phased out at Disney and other studios. So thank heavens for the medium of television because it provided employment for a lot of animation artists who would have been out in the cold had it not been for television.
Yeah, when I started at Disney, I was in between on Lady and the Tramp. Mm-hmm. And the quota at that time was 1 drawing an hour. If you did 7 to 8 drawings a day, you were doing your quota.
Doing darn good.
Then after Lady and the Tramp completed, I went on to Termite Terrace, which is Warner Brothers Looney Tunes. And on the very first day, I did 13 Speedy Gonzales drawings. And I was very proud. One of the guys in my movement said, oh, well, you know, we require 30 drawings a day. And I think, oh my gosh, from 1 an hour to 30 a day.
Yeah.
And so needless to say, I had to up my outtake.
Yeah.
or
Wow.
output.
I remember at Disney, I'm thinking about animation in terms of footage. The top animators at Disney were doing around 5 feet a week on the feature films, 5 feet a week, and when you went to television, it was more like 100 feet a week of animation. So you went from 5 feet a week to 100 feet a week. Quite a shock. And a lot of artists just could not make the adjustment, could not make that change.
Yeah.
A few did. They just adjusted to it and began cranking out that footage. But a lot of people, especially people who had spent their whole career at Disney, they were just totally overwhelmed by how fast television moved.
Well,
of course, Bill Hanna gave the motivation. The more footage you turn out, the more money you're going to make, because he started paying on the basis of footage.
That's right.
Interesting. So I think one of the great advantages, of course, for anybody that could adapt to that limited animation that was happening, if you're someone that was really engaged with a fully rounded Disney style, yeah, I could see where they would have a real problem.
Yeah.
Well, the irony of it is that limited animation was, you might say, the pioneered at Hanna-Barbera by a Disney animator, Dick Lundy.
Yeah.
Goes way back to the Hyperion days, worked on like Snow White and all of the classics. And he came over to Hanna-Barbera and was able to structure the so-called limited animation.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And it didn't mean the animation had to be, I mean, it had to be lacking in charm or humor. Just because you were animating with fewer drawings, it didn't mean your scenes weren't as effective as they were with full animation. It was just having to make that adjustment, you know, to be able to be flexible, to adapt to the new way of doing things. But your animation could still have the same kind of really cool timing and posing and staging, all the things that made animation so great. You could still do that with limited animation, and it looked just as fun and entertaining as full animation did. Mm-hmm. Just knowing how to use your tools. And good animators, they just brought that knowledge and skill over to limited animation.
Yeah, the original innovators of that limited animation did stylized animation. That was at UPA.
Yeah, that's right.
And UPA's style, the limited animation they used, basically, that was what was adopted by Hanna-Barbera, with the legs walking with a still body, mouth moving and all. And I think UPA sort of created that, not so much as cost savings, but it was kind of a new innovation.
Yeah.
And the style, the backgrounds and everything was just so contemporary at that time.
That's exactly it. I mean, it was more graphically driven, so it lent itself. So, but then that was the blessing, is that it lent itself to television, which required a higher output as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. One of the things with Hanna-Barbera, one of the distinct stylistic choices was that ring around the collar, the tendency for all the characters to be drawn with neckties.
Always had something to separate the head from the body.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like Yogi Bear, we think of him. But yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that, that stylistic choice. Why did they do that again?
Well, you know, you could have Yogi Bear standing there with his collar. So you have just that one drawing, which is a body, because with the Hanna-Barbera style of animation, you didn't have too much of the action like this. They stood there pretty much, and then the head talked and bobbed and all, which was on a separate drawing. So the animators didn't have to sit there and draw a bunch of bodies also. You know, it was one body, and then animate heads on a separate level, and they just held the body all the way down the exposure.
Yeah.
Was,
At
then when
Disney,
the head stopped,
at Disney, we would have been doing trace backs. You know, we would have been tracing back that entire
Yeah.
body on every drawing.
little movement, you know.
Yeah.
And then the same when Yogi would stop bobbing his head,
Yeah.
the mouth would just be again on a separate
Level.
Maybe the eyes would blink. That was all separate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think of all those characters, Yogi Bear, Fred Flintstone, Jetsons, Magilla Gorilla, Peter Pan, they all had collars and neckties.
They did.
Oh, yeah.
They certainly, and there was a purpose for it.
That's right.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that decade of the 1960s, that transition from theatrical film to feature and television for that, Hanna-Barbera was renowned. There was that huge growth and a dominance. Then now everybody's watching Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that I think someone's asking, of all the shows that you worked on, what was your favorite and why?
Myself, because I started at Hanna-Barbera when the Jetsons was being, it was just developed, sold, and we were actually working on the first episode when I came aboard. And it was, again, like a whole new thing for me.
Yeah.
I had just come from Bob Clampett's on the Beanie and Cecil show. We try to exercise as many cost savings, but not to the extent that Hanna-Barbera was using. So again, you come into a whole new system. The thing is, I wasn't animating, I was doing layouts. So I didn't have to think in terms of, well, where does the body separate this? And I just did whole drawings, whole scenes, drew the whole background, drew the whole characters and poses and all. And so it was kind of easy in terms of setting up the scenes.
Yeah.
Floyd, what was your favorite show or character to work on there at Hanna-Barbera?
You know, it's funny. I was working at Disney in the 1960s, I believe, and I would visit Hanna-Barbera because it was a new studio. It was like the new game in town. And even though I had a great job at Disney, I would go over and visit Hanna-Barbera because it was a new and exciting place. Eventually, I started moonlighting, and eventually I was animating on a show that you probably heard of, Johnny Quest. It was an animated cartoon show that was treated like it was a prime time show. And that is, it wasn't on Saturday mornings, it was on in the evening, like a regular TV show. And I remember at the time, it was very exciting. It was like nothing else we had ever seen before on television, at least with TV animation. And so working with great guys like Alex Toth, and guys who came from the background of graphic novels and comic books. It was a very exciting time to kind of like begin my animation career at Hanna-Barbera as an animator. Eventually, I became a layout artist, and guess who I worked for? My first layout gig was working for a guy named Willie Ito on a show called Josie and the Pussycats.
And I was a taskmaster.
And Willie was a great boss in that I never saw him. I worked for Willie and I never saw him.
Probably he was at a canteen having a drink there.
Exactly.
I think so.
That was our younger days.
Yeah.
But, you know, those days, you know, that transition, and I think not much of our audience really appreciates or understand that transition from theatrical, how the studios shut down. Everybody was making cartoons at the Hollywood studios, and then it stopped all of a sudden, and now it transitions to television. Yeah. But, like you say, you get to have all these great animators from Warner, from MGM, Warner's, Fleischer's, you know, Paramount. And they all come working in to come in there.
You bet, yeah.
Yeah, when Bill Hanna let out the help call, you know, we had people coming in, old retired guys from Fleischer's and Terry Toons. Some of them actually settled in Southern California. Many work was sent to them, you know. But it was an adjustment, like Floyd was talking about Johnny Quest.
Yeah.
That's kind of realistic type show.
Right.
And most of the animators at that time is what we would call rubber holes and animators.
Yeah.
You know, like the old Mickey Mouse at the
Yeah.
no structure and no anatomy and
Yeah.
whatever. And so you get a character like Ray Banion, you know, who is a realistic character.
Right.
And there's no structure, and also that's when, like Floyd was saying, we had to call in people like Alex Toth and some of the
Doug Wildey. Yeah.
So these comic artists that were doing they had a more of a graphics or
exactly,
style.
and that's where the later shows started to have more structure. And, you know, and then pretty soon, because of the fact that Bill and Joe realized that they could easily produce this type of show, we're doing Super Friends and all that. Which is not my genre.
Yeah, I worked on Super Friends, and it's really funny. I really hated superheroes, and I wanted to work on funny stuff, you know, the stuff Doug Wildey called Bigfoot animation,
right?
Stuff like, you know, Yogi Bear and the Flintstones. And I really didn't want to do superheroes. And I got stuck on this show called Super Friends. And my drawing, you know, in terms of human anatomy was not that great at that time. And so I felt, gee, I'm really the wrong person for this superhero show. But in those days, if you got, that was a job you did. If you got stuck with a superhero show, that's what you did, like it or not. So I had to work on Super Friends, which I would have been much happier doing the Flintstones.
Well, how many shows were in production at one time? Like how many different series?
Oh, man.
You can't keep track because it's relentless.
Yeah, there were so many, you know.
Yeah, Joe was quite a salesman.
Yeah.
He had quite a reputation with the networks because all the studios that were in existence during that period, whenever there was a half-hour opening, other studios did submit their ideas.
Yeah.
But inevitably, that half hour will end up with Hanna-Barbera.
Right.
And so Joe would be back in New York, you know, meeting with the networks and all. But on the Friday before he left, he would be having lunch with his writers at one of the Italian restaurants in Hollywood, which was one of his favorites.
Right.
And they'd all be drinking martinis and all. So naturally, the cocktail napkin was your drawing pad. And you guys would come up with an idea. How about this, Joe? Make quick sketches on a sopping napkin. Joe would look at it and put it in his pocket. He'd go back east and based on some sketch on a napkin, he would sell a show.
Yeah.
And he'd get on the phone Sunday night and say, "Hey, Bill, I just sold another half hour, so you better start building another crew." By this time, Bill says, "Are you kidding? There's no more animators left in town." And that sort of started the cycle of sending work to the Orient.
Right, getting a serviced overseas.
Yeah.
Right, but because I'm thinking like at the studio, they had what two studios in Hollywood, I think, or one studio there.
Well, we had the main Hanna-Barbera studio, and then across the street was like the annex, and that's where Bill had his a lot of his ink and paint girls over there, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then because of the fact that he started to encourage animators to work at home, you know, I guess you might say the other studios were the homes of a lot of these animators, you know.
Yeah.
But they turned out the footage. You know, you had these guys that did the beautiful animation on Tom and Jerry at MGM, and then they had to really switch gears and crank out, like Floyd was saying, all that footage.
But they did it
overnight.
Yeah.
And at any given time, it seems there was at least 12 or 15 shows being
Yeah, there was.
done.
There was.
And you're producing 24-minute shows each week.
Yeah.
It's tremendous.
So
And
how
then
we
at
got it
the
done. Yeah.
end of the season, those of us in layout
Yeah.
was basically Joe's creative group.
Yeah.
And so most of the studio would be on a layoff or time off, so to speak. And but we would be working on presentation, creating new ideas and all. And we would come up with some of the craziest shows. And then we would also create shows that we would say, hey, that's a winner.
Yeah.
And then we find out after the meeting with the networks, the dumb show is sold. And what we thought was a sure winner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You never knew what the networks were going to buy. You think they'd have a great show, they'd pass on it. You thought you had a really stupid show and they'd buy it.
Oh, there you go.
That's the way things worked.
Well, now both of you have seen such changes. I mean, in 60 odd years or more. I mean,
Yeah.
the way it's developed.
Oh, yeah.
We have a question here from Abigail. She's asking about what are your thoughts on how animation has developed from this hand-drawn animation on paper and ink and paint to digital and now with CG. What is your thoughts on how
Floyd,
animation's developed?
You were involved with the transition, so
Yeah, what?
you might speak.
Yeah, well, back in 1994, I came into work early one morning and a movie was being run on, what we called, the moviola, the editing machines back in those days. And I saw this new movie that I could not identify. I didn't know what the heck it was because it didn't look like anything we were doing at Walt Disney Studios. Well, it turns out that film was Toy Story, being produced by a little outfit up in the Bay Area, up in San Francisco, by a little company called Pixar. And I saw this film from Pixar Animation Studios, and I said, holy smokes. I recognize even back in 1994 that animation was never going to be the same. That this new medium of digital animation, that is making a movie without pencils and paper and ink and paint and all of the stuff all the tools we had been using for decades, all of this was going to change with the advent of the computer and with digital animation. And the first thing that occurred to me was, I want to leave Disney and move up north and work at Pixar, because this is where the future lies. And eventually I did do just that. I left Disney and I moved up to the Bay Area to work for Pixar Animation Studios because I knew a change was coming and I knew that things would never be the same.
And you still work for them or consult for them, Floyd?
For Pixar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I keep in touch with my colleagues up at Pixar Animation Studios, notably Pete Docter, because Pete, who's the creative head of Pixar today, is a good friend of mine. I worked for Pete way back on his first film, Monsters Incorporated. And better than that, I went to high school with Pete Docter's father.
Oh,
shows how old I am.
His father.
I went to high school with Pete's dad. But anyway, I keep.
Well, you're old.
I'm an old guy. I'm 86 years old.
You're young.
I never thought I'd live this long, but my hero is Joe Grant, and Joe was working at Disney until he was in his early 90s. I think Joe was still working for Disney when he passed away at age 96. So Joe's my hero. I want to be like Joe and keep on going until I can't do it anymore.
When I started in 1954, he retired.
That's right.
And
That's right.
Years later, they recalled him.
Yeah.
And he kept working till in his 90s. So
yeah, I didn't even know Joe was still alive when I came back. I came back to the Disney studio after being away for a few years, and Van said, "Why don't you stop in and say hello to Joe?" And I said, "Joe who?" And he said, "Joe Grant." I said, "Oh my God, he's still alive."
I thought, that's the worst when you thought the guy had died and he's still with us.
Yeah.
Well,
So
they
people
say
are going to be
all
saying the same.
cartoonists
They're
never
going to say the
die.
same thing about me. Floyd
Well,
Norman, he's still alive.
well, I remember when it was Grim Natwick's 100th birthday,
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
and maybe you'll be there.
that's right. I was at that party, by the way.
Were you? Oh,
Yeah, I was.
I, I've seen photos of it, and it's looked like a swinging time. I'll say
It
that.
was. It was. It was animators who came from not only all over the country, but literally from all over the world to
Yeah.
celebrate Grimm's
Wow.
birthday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. For those that don't know Grim Natwick, he was one of the original animators with Betty Boop. He animated the character Snow White.
Yeah.
He went on to work with UPA, of course, and carried on. Great career.
Yeah. What a career. Yeah.
Yeah, right. What a legacy.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have a couple of other questions here
Oh,
from our audience. Here, I'm just going through them. So again, having worked on some of the most known cartoons out there, how does it feel to be part of such a massive legacy and to be part of the shift in how cartoons were made? When you look back at what you did there.
well, I guess in retrospect, now I could really appreciate my own personal history. But back then, it was a job. You
Yeah.
know, you go to
Yeah.
work, you work
Yeah.
on the Jetsons, you work on the Flintstones, and then it's aired. But on Saturday morning, rather than go to see what I worked on, I would tune in to watch what Filmation made or some of the competing studios, you know.
Yeah. Mhm.
So I really didn't know or appreciate what I was involved in. So when you go to a place like the Comic-Con and you're on a panel
Yeah.
and you have a mass audience of baby boomers and all the kids that watch the show, and they would ask questions,
Yeah.
and I just kind of felt stumped. God, I don't really know that, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever.
Well,
So
they expect you to be the expert in all
Exactly,
things
yeah.
of Flintstones or Johnny Quest or whatever it is, but
Yeah.
it was your
More
job.
about
The fans
Filmation
knew more
show.
about the show than we did.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but now, I could really appreciate what we worked on,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
I could really feel that, wow. I know Floyd feels like he had a wonderful career, and actually, in this case, he's still having it.
Well, to that point, what are you both working on? So, Floyd, sounds like you're continuing to work at 86. What are you working on today?
I'm developing a number of projects for television. Unfortunately, the producers won't let me talk about it,
That's
but one is live action and one is animated. I appeared in a feature motion picture earlier this year. I actually played, I was an actor. I was actually playing a part in a movie, in a live action film.
Wow.
Just yesterday, I was recording voiceover stuff for a Disney feature film that, once again, it hasn't been announced yet, so I can't talk about it. So I was doing work for Disney just yesterday, recording narration tracks for the feature film we're doing. So I'm keeping busy. Even at age 86, I'm actually busier now than when I retired at age 65. At age 65, I thought my career was over, but it turns out it was just beginning.
That's awesome. What about you, Willie? What are you working on?
Well, my children's book that I illustrated right after I retired has taken off, and it is now being produced as an animated. Well, it's 14 minutes long, so it's no longer considered a short subject. I don't know where you draw the line.
Yeah.
It's being done in Florence, Italy, and Sheridan College in Toronto.
Yeah.
Tony Tarantini is my creative director there, and my animation director is Sandro Group.
Oh, Sandro.
Well, Sandro,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great.
Oh,
That's great. Yeah.
been a wonderful.
Yeah, we did a master class with Sandro. He's a tremendous individual, beautiful
Yeah,
person.
he
He
is.
really is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And When do we expect to see that released?
Well, we have CTN coming up in next month, November. And I will be presenting the animatics that's done to date. And we're actually trying to raise funds to continue the production.
Yeah.
But in the meanwhile, I'm doing a lot of work for Chuck Jones galleries.
Oh.
So I'm recreating a lot of scenes from Chuck's cartoons, but then they got a license to recreate Hanna-Barbera. So I'm doing that too.
Oh.
And then I just for the fun of it, did a bunch of Tex Avery setup, and they loved it. So I'm doing Tex Avery. That's
There's
one of mine.
That's one of yours.
Yeah.
Did I send that to you?
Yes, you did, Willie. Thanks.
Hello, bub.
Yeah. I'll be darned. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, so it's keeping me busy, and fortunately, I'm busier now
Yeah.
than I was. You know, at least when I was working, I could put in my 8, maybe 10 hours a day and come home and relax. But now I seem to be working around the clock, and
Yeah.
which is good though.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go.
It's good because
Yeah.
at my age, my hands are arthritic. And,
Oh, yeah.
Mine still work.
yeah, it works.
They still
That's
work.
awesome.
I'm lucky. I know that a lot of people, as they get older, they tend to have problems with arthritis. My mother had very bad arthritis, and I thought, sure, it was going to happen to me when I turned 70 or 80. But so far, these hands are still going strong.
So you're still doing it digitally.
No, well, yeah,
With
well, I'm digital, and I'm
your digits.
I use my digits. I use my digits, analog and digitally. You know what?
There you
My artwork has proven to be therapy for me because
Yeah.
I do these watercolor sketches of Disney characters. And mainly I started doing that for therapy because what happens when you work at the stupid computer all day long, you want to get back to the drawing board. You want to pick up a pencil. You want to pick up a paintbrush. And so I do these Disney drawings, these characters of the Disney feature films and shorts. And I do it mainly for my own relaxation and therapy to get back and to actually touch art again. Because on the computer, there's a separation when you work digitally. I mean, yeah, it's great and it's good and we do a lot of great things, but I'll tell you, there's nothing like pencil and paper, paint and brush, that tactile, tangible way of creating art, that never gets old.
I have a Cintiq, which is still in the box. I'm so intimidated.
I can't believe that. Willie, I've purchased 4 of them over the years. I have four Cintiq tablets, and Willie's is still in the box.
Mine is still. I'm so used to just sitting there at the drawing board.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Good old Blackwing pencil.
But well, just keep in mind you can't screw it up as long as it stays in the box. So
Yeah.
But that's
you can't make any mistakes that way.
But you guys have made a lifetime of doing animation since the 50s.
Yeah.
We have a number of students that will be watching this. What advice would you have for students today? Maybe you kick it off, Floyd.
Oh, advice for students today coming into animation?
Yeah.
Oh, be like me and Willie. That is, be in love with this medium. I mean, we do what we do because of our passion for animation. It's not just a paycheck. We actually love this crazy job. I came to Disney back in the 50s because it was my childhood dream to want to work for Walt Disney. It was my childhood dream to want to make animated cartoons. I do this not because it's just a career and a job, but I do it because I really wouldn't want to do anything else.
right.
So if you want to work in this business, you've got to commit to it. And I mean, you've got to wholeheartedly commit to being an animation filmmaker. And you can't let anything stand in your way. when I talk to young people and they say, I want to get into the business, I say, go for it.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can keep you out except yourself. If you really want to do this job and you commit to it and you're willing to put in the hard work, it's not just dreams, but it's hard work too. It's dreams combined with hard work. But if you really want that, you can do it. I mean, we did it. I was just a kid sitting in the back of my dad's car reading Disney comic books and Marvel comic books when I was a kid, knowing that one day I would be a professional cartoonist. I would be an animator. I did it, and you can do it too.
I have a granddaughter that's impassioned with animation, and she'll sit there and draw till 4 or 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
And then get her necessary sleep in, and then back at it again. Then I have a great granddaughter who is showing a lot of talent in the anime stuff.
Yeah.
And I want to keep encouraging both of them to stick with it, because when I was finishing junior college in San Francisco in the 50s, my friends were all going to the university, taking up pre-med, pharmacy school, engineering, this and that.
Real jobs.
I'm going to be a cartoonist. That's so frivolous.
Yeah.
I should get into something more substantial.
Yeah.
And so when I went to my instructor and says, do you know, I think I might change and go into medical illustrating. And he looked at me at that time and says, no, you're not. You're going down to LA, you're going to go to Chenard's and get into the animation business. Because if you're a medical illustrator, after a while, you're going to hate it. Yeah. And of course, now medical illustration is all done by computer anyway.
Yeah.
I'm so computer illiterate, I'd be out of a job anyway. So like Floyd was saying, if you're impassioned, stick with it, go into it, because you got the God-given talent to do it. So use it.
Yeah. No, that's my observation, especially teaching with so many students, that their parents, while they might not understand the idea, why would you want to be an animator? They support it, but they would prefer them to be lawyers or realtors or bankers or something.
Yeah.
In the world, animation is like way down there.
Right. Yeah, my father was kind of hoping I'd become a barber.
Oh.
And then shortly after that, the Beatles came into town, and I would have been bankrupt before I even cut my first hair.
Well, it's I'll give you I have a couple more questions here. They're some of them are very similar, but let's see here. Of course, some of them were talking about how the shows themselves, the Hanna-Barbera shows, were imitations of other live action shows. You think of the Flintstones and the Honeymooners. Do you think of any other examples? What other ones?
Well, of course.
Was there a show based on Happy Days?
Yeah, we did the Happy Days, Fonzie, and it was just one of those natural things that the story guys would all sit around and say, well, we're going to come up with a new show. And then, of course, what's currently popular, it'd be ripped off. And of course, when the Flintstones was done, then the natural thing was the Jetsons.
And
then I supervised a show called Roman Holidays, which is the family in Roman days. And wait till father gets home. And the one I really liked was what was the name of the Huddles? It was
the football show.
Family.
Yeah.
And Iwo Takamoto designed the characters to look like Walter Matthau.
Yeah.
And
Jack Lemmon, was it? Or
well, the short neighbor was kind of like Barney of the Flintstones.
Oh, okay.
And then the main character was based after Walter Matthau.
Yeah.
and he captured in cartoon form
Yeah.
the look of math. Evo was such a good designer.
Yeah. It wasn't the coach Joe Besser at one point?
I think. Oh yeah, the coach. Yeah.
Coach Mad Dog.
Oh, what are you guys watching these days? Do you take time out to watch animation, shorts or series that are streaming?
I did because I'm a member of the Academy, so I'm always
Yeah.
watching the short content. So yeah, there's just tons of material out there today, and so many young men and women who are creating animation. So there's more animation being done today than ever before. So there's a lot of stuff out there.
And of course, the style is so diverse now.
Yeah, you bet.
Some of the styles I can't really get with.
Because we're old. Because we're old timers. No, but it's everything from anime to European sensibility to very, very postmodern stuff. It's just all over the place. But I mean, good heavens, there's just a wealth of creativity. And it's a very exciting time to be in animation. I tell my students, boy, oh boy, I wish I was 25 years old again, because I would be really busy making films.
Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we can't underestimate the impact of Hanna-Barbera, that's for sure. I mean, they really forever changed the world of cartoons for the small screen and the development of less costly animation. When you even look at television today, I mean, the reason why we have primetime shows like the Simpsons and Family Guy and such,
Yeah.
that's because of the Flintstones.
Oh,
and Jurassic
yeah.
Quest.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
See, when back in the 50s, when we started to develop shows of that nature, most of the voice actors were veterans of radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we got Penny Singleton, who was Blondie back then, and she was Judy Jetson, and then of course we had a whole array of voice actors that in the early radio days.
They came from the golden age of radio. And
Yeah, what's his name? George. He did George Jetson. I'm trying to think of the voice actor, but yeah. But great example.
And of course, guys that did the voice of Fred Flintstone, you still see them in some of the old movies on TCM. So, there's the guy that did the Flintstones voice and all that. And,
yeah. Wasn't that was that Hal Perry who did?
I think that's who.
Well, there was, I think, 3 different.
Freds. There were 3 different Freds over the years.
Yeah.
but all these guys came from radio, and
they were all radio stars.
Great character actors and great voice guys. Yeah. And we just had the opportunity to work with so many of these talented people.
Yeah, it was fun hearing them record, because my little cubbyhole was right next to the Studio A door.
Yeah.
The red light would be flashing. It says, "Do not enter," while the red light's on. But you could hear, the voices and the recording going on.
Yeah.
Because, the Hanna-Barbera building was a beautiful building. Well, it was built on the cheap, so you could.
There you go.
But it was functional. It worked.
It was a good building.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. This has been an excellent, it's been a short. I'm going to invite our audience to go into the conference sessions. We have another full interview that's available on our web, the Spark Eventive page that they could enjoy. Willie, thank you. Floyd, thank you. This has been tremendous.
Thank
It's
you
always
again.
a pleasure seeing you.
Really appreciate being invited to participate.
Yeah, and to share some fun days with you, because we had a lot of fun at Hanna-Barbera.
We did. Yeah. So, well, adios, you guys. Good seeing you all.